All right, everybody, I'm back today, and this time I brought partners in crime. So Doug's been on before. Mike, this is the first time on the channel, but you know Mike from being co-author on books like this, somebody who knows both of us actually picks out which murder scene Mike wrote and which ones are my ideas. So if that tells you how twisted the individual members of the writing team are, that'll help sort that one out. Although one person did say that I was obviously behind one of them and had a few issues with somebody. And I'm like, I wasn't thinking about anybody in particular. If you overread into that, that's on you. But one of the things I get a lot, Mike, I'm sure you get it, is hey, when are you gonna go to write the next one of these or the next one of whatever, right? You get that?
Yes, I do.
And
It's crazy.
I don't think people understand just how much work goes into one of these because I see writers sometimes will crank out two, three, four books a year. And first off, hats off to people that can do it. But second off, the amount of time it takes to do that means you're at your computer and you don't have anything else going on in the world ever, like kids, a wife, a dog that needs to go out, that need to exercise, a job, right? So I started rereading this one a while ago, and I wanted to decompose just like the first two chapters to get into just how much fucking work it takes to write one of these books and have a story hang together for 350 pages, much less two volumes, which gets up to 700 pages, that people actually want to turn the pages on, right? So it's not as easy as people give it credit for. And Tom Clancy in his debut novel, which was Hunt for Red October, was obviously well received. Lots of people read it, lots of people liked it. His second book was massive by comparison as far as length goes. And I wanted to kind of just dive into it a little bit to be like, hey, this is one of the master storytellers that was out there, who, by the way, before he was the quote master of the techno thriller, was a freaking insurance agent from Maryland someplace. But this particular book was his sort of second step out the door. So I did a lot of research on it. And Red Storm Rising is the book. Tom Clancy, who also really co-authored it with Larry Bond, he shows up on the copyright page, but not the cover for some reason. I never
I
found
had forgotten about that.
it. Yeah, they actually wrote it together. Um,
Yeah.
and a little bit is hey, people, when you want to write a book, how do you go about it, right? So this thing is 652 pages long. It makes its presence known if you're carrying it around not on a Kindle. It's not small, right?
It's about like that.
2.5 inches. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not light. But it's one of those books. Once you start reading, you just need time because you can't stop. And for a sophomore writer, and Larry Bond, who wasn't really that much of a writer at the time, he was a game designer. He was designing war games. To come up with something like this, it's pretty incredible. Um, so how did these two guys meet, and who were they? Well, one was an insurance agent, the other one made war games. So they kind of met and became friends while actually playing a game of Harpoon, which was an old hexagonal, thing that you played on a desktop. And Tom Clancy was very clear in saying, "Hey, I used Harpoon as source material for Red October." I have a whole video out on Red October about other places I think Tom Clancy got information for that one. Go watch that video. I think he had sources, because he had terms in it that only the Navy should have known, unless somebody was violating security clearances. Um, but the two actually met, and this was Tom Clancy's words, not mine. They met at a gaming convention. He wanted to meet Larry Bond because he thought Harpoon was fun. So he's like, "Oh, Larry's going to be at this gaming convention. I'm going." Well, they became friends over playing this game. The two apparently became good friends and started working on a book together that ultimately led to this. So when people ask you, hey, when your wife, girlfriend, fiance, whatever, or somebody goes, hey, why are you going to the gaming convention? Well, you meet people and you never know who, right? And who knows what comes out of it?
That's
Uh,
true.
Mike and I met in high school, by the way. So it's Tom Clancy's second book. I already went through all this, but the thing that bugged me about this is this was put out by Putnam in the 80s. Tom Clancy's name appears in the front. Larry Bonds does not. And I think publishers were not really comfortable at the time listing co-authors, which is just stupid. I mean, they should have put Larry on the front cover. I mean, even all over the preface to this thing, Tom Clancy was like, without Larry Bond, this doesn't happen. He's on the copyright. And it's really the two of them work together to put this out. So what's the deal here? So any book you come up with, like, so Mike and I have written a couple. And I'll talk about one series. I'll let Mike talk about the Diocese Dilemma a little bit. So you have to have a concept. You have to have something that you can get more than 20 pages out of and have it work, right? So I had one of the first book ideas I ever had led to Last World War, which is now a two-part series and someday hopefully be three. But the idea was, what happens if we do go into the next war and somebody launches nukes at the United States and some of our allies in the Middle East? How do we respond? Do we nuke them? Do we go to war? What's our response to that? And if you look at some of the U.S. leadership, my thought was, we're probably not going to nuke back if we know the enemy's out of their nuclear weapons. If they use them all, we're probably going to go conventional. But that led to a whole bunch of work, and that led to a two-part series book. So, Mike, you want to talk about the Diocese Dilemma a little bit? About that one being the concept and kind of going into the whole book?
Yeah. So with diocese, the general concept we kind of ran with on that one is that we look at society as it's going right now, and we see that, man, I'm trying to figure out how to say it without like going all biblical and
well, I think it really decaying society and lowering of standards and people just kind of wanting to get away with whatever the fuck they want to get away with.
Yeah, and and we see it every day on the news. We see, crimes. There's no consequences for crime, and we see drug addiction, and it's, let's not treat the addiction. Let's make it easier for them to get high and give them needles instead of helping them treat. We just see it every day, and the standards have become so low that people just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And
so we took
so
that concept and turned it into a Catholic priest who got really tired of people using the confessional as a get out of hell free card and said, hey, look, we're going to come in and confess the same sins over and over and over again. Well, it turns out the priest is from a mafia family. The mafia family has a history of whacking people on occasion.
Mafia.
And next thing you know, he's like, oh, well, hey, you've confessed the same thing a couple of times. That's it. We're done. Right. So we're going to stab you through the heart and send you off to meet St. Peter and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, let St. Peter, figure it out where you need to be.
And by the way, let the punishment fit the crime.
Fit the crime. Yeah.
Brutal, and I'm really not sorry about what that I did to that guy's testicles with the corkscrew.
Well, let's not go there. let's let him read it and find out.
Exactly. So the concept of this one was, remember, this is the mid 80s, so the Cold War is still very real. How do you start a story like this, right? How do you come up with something that's going to hang together for like 600 pages? So, I don't know about you, but like Doug, if you're in the mid 80s and you're thinking, hey, what's something that's going to actually become a huge problem and cause a world war? I could, if I had to sit down and think about it, okay, somebody launches nukes. Why did somebody launch nukes? What's the trigger that gets people to do that, right? And there has to be something in there that's an actual trigger, not just Russia feels kind of pissed off today, right? That's not really viable, right? So you got to come up with something. And the way these authors approached it was economic. There was a key Soviet oil complex completely destroyed by religious fundamentalists. I'll let people guess which religion it was. And this was the 80s. Remember, this was way pre 9/11 and all kinds of other stuff. But the USSR, after this group destroys this oil complex, it's what happens, right? Their economy is fucked. This oil complex was like 30% of their oil production, which is a measurable part of their GDP. How do you get grain to people? How do you get what the fuck do you do, right? If you're the leadership in Russia, I'll let you guys answer that. What do you do next? Do you actually try to figure out how to rearrange your economy, admit you're weak? Do you go off and say, hey, look, let's what do you do next? What's your answer to it?
What do you think, Doug?
Well, I think going the economic route's the right route, right? Because what's the motivate, as many people would say, what's the motivation of all things? The money, right? What's behind it? But Tim, we've talked about before, like how, whether it's in the book and the screen, the translation works because it's the emotion that it's able to elicit from you as the reader when you're reading something. So that not knowing and going, okay, if the money's what's motivating this, then who's the one pushing the buttons with the money? So is it the president? Is it other faction people inside the government? And what levels of government know, what levels of government don't. So it's pulling the reader down that storyline, right? That's going to really frighten them, so to speak. You start with that initial fear, war, death. Well, why? Money, well, who? Right? And so the question is, does that translate, right? The same between what's in the book, the 680-page book, versus the 2-hour movie.
Well, so these guys, I mean, this one was never a movie, but this one hit the oil refinery that got hit, according to the book, and Tom Clancy is a very technical guy, right? Accounted for 30, it was an oil refinery and production site. So it accounted for 30% of Russia's oil production and 17% of their refining capacity. So remember, at that point in time, Russia could barely feed their own people. They were buying grain from us. They were importing stuff. They were still falling short on oil needs, and they had brownouts and forced blackouts. And can we keep factories going? And now you're knocking out 17% of oil capacity, which is a big fucking number, right? And the Russians are paranoid.
For them,
right? So they're like, what do we do next? Do we go admit that we're weak? How bad really is it, right? Well, the Russians have this big meeting with the Politburo, and they're like, holy crap, what do we do? 3 years to repair it, millions in currency, which they didn't have. This was 85, right? They didn't have a lot of cash. They were pouring so much money.
They were so the ruble was so under marketable, under marketed.
It was in the book. It was like, it's not just millions of rubles, it's more because of the exchange rate. And that exchange rate is going to get worse because now we're shipping stuff out, right? So we don't have all these nice natural materials to go trade with. Now we're just dealing with cash and we don't have it.
So where do they turn?
Well, that was the question, right? What do? Do we negotiate? Do we just throw ourselves on the world stage and say, hey, look, we're weak, which is not really a Russian way to do things.
No.
They turn around and try to buy oil? Or does the Politburo go, we're not that far from the Middle East, guys. All we got to do is go a little bit south. They got what we need. Let's just go take it. Right. So if you're setting up the premise for a book that could lead to a world war, these guys were genius at it, right? I mean, they kind of sat down and were like, this oil refinery that was in the book was a very real oil refinery, and those really were the numbers. And if you really wanted to fuck Russia to the point where they're like, we got to go start blowing shit up someplace else, that would be one way to do it, right? Because they don't like to appear weak. They don't like to appear like they're not in charge. They don't like to appear like they can't take care of their own people. Go take it by force, right? So, but what's the next step, right? Because you got NATO protecting everything around. You got to do it fast. You got to do it hard. You got to do it, with extreme violence, and you got to do it hopefully without getting your ass nuked, right? So that's how they set up the premise to this. And when I thought through that, I was like, how the hell did these guys come up with that, right? But to me, it seems so plausible. And that to me is such a good hook for fiction that you've just flat out got to have it well thought out and say, okay, what's the hook that sucks me into this, that makes me go, I'm in, right?
Well, and they had to do it in such a way is that it's realistic. And even for being back in the 80s, even with the capability, the governmental capabilities, any sort of buildup, they'd have to figure out how to be able to do that as well. And these guys figured it all out. I mean, these guys had it all.
They even had it in the book, like, oh, it's going to take us 3 months to get ready. And the Russians are going, nope, we don't have 3 months because our oil supply is already low, right? You got to go now. Right? So you got to go unprepared. And I'm former military. Mike was military, and Doug, your dad was military.
Grew up right in the military family, yeah.
3 months ain't a lot to mobilize for a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
People think you can just flip a switch and get there, but it takes weeks to get a carrier group ready to go out, right? So if you're saying, hey, we're going to go do a major land invasion and take all the oil fields in the Middle East when NATO's got shit parked there to stop us, that's a big problem to kind of get going. So that's sort of the next part of the book. But the fact that these guys thought through, you put Russia into this just absolute urgent situation. And here's a guy who designed board games and another guy who was an insurance agent who figured that shit out. So part of what I like to do with this channel, and part of what I think is interesting in the current market is most of the books that are coming out are kind of young adult. They're sort of superhero-y, they're paranormal romance, which I've never completely understood. But
It gets a little creepy, but
Yeah.
I'll go there.
I think it all started with Twilight and just kind of got crazy.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with anybody who reads that stuff, but I think the market has shifted away from well thought out, kind of reasonable stuff and gone into let's just crank it out faster, right? Let's just get the stuff and throw it against a wall and see what sticks, right? And that's not the way I like to work. And I know Mike, you don't like to do that either. You like to really think through things. So like
Yeah.
even some of the screenplays we're working on that are adaptations of our book. You take 350 pages and boil it down to 200 pages in a script. That's hard to do. Um, so I think one thing that's missing from the current market, and one thing I think that people aren't doing as much, is reading. And when they see books that are this size, everybody shies away. But if you look at some of the statistics on what actually adults are reading, it's kind of disheartening, right? Because I found this thing by the National Endowment of the Arts that said in 2021, if you asked adults, 32% of them, 33% of them read one fiction book the year before. And if you asked them about two, the numbers declined rapidly. So to me, people who read this stuff, and this is psychological studies talking, are people who are more creative. They're people who tend to be out of the box. They don't need people to come tell them what to do as employees. They tend to be self-starters. And I think two things are going on in our current market space. Number one, publishers aren't allowing the kind of time it takes to do one of these things, because Clancy would take 2 or 3 years between books. And
Sure.
now publishers want what? David Baldacci, who I've met and talked to, and he's a great guy, puts out 2 a year, right? And he's a good writer, so he kind of gets away with it. But you're not putting out this kind of stuff that's this well thought out, 2, 3 times a year. You're just not. So
Well, and now you also see that there's a lot of co-authors going on in what I think I am some putting theory out here is that they'll work on 2 books, but they will work on 2 books simultaneously, and you got one working on one and one working on the other. And they go back and forth.
But you and I have written a couple books together. That would get
Yeah.
confusing to me, right? What storyline am I on? And
Exactly.
so it's like, and I hate to bring up George R. R. Martin. So Doug, I'm going to throw this one to you. Like George R. R. Martin with Game of Thrones. I don't think he thought it completely through, because I read all the books and I watched the series, and it started to fall apart.
Oh yeah.
Well, and I mean, and then they had right, and so they had to go on to do their own thing because he wasn't finished with the books. But to me, this kind of parallels the whole thing that is going on with Marvel in the last few years. If you try to crank out too much content, try to force the creativity, it ends up being garbage, and people won't follow with it. Of course, ever again chasing the almighty dollar. You'll get more content out there, so more people will read it, will view it, whatever. Sure, great. You may think your initial sales will go well, but they're going to go downhill because the content's crap, because it's forced and it's not actually taking the time to be thought through and actually be thought provoking and emotion eliciting. Right? It's just, oh, they'll like this, throw it out there.
That's exactly why I'm not afraid of AI content generation, right? It's
right. Yeah. It's not going to kill the creatives, right? Because
it's great for 3 paragraphs. Hey, tell me about this book. It can come up with sort of a 3-paragraph description of this book for me. But hey, write this book. It ain't gonna do that, right?
No.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that kind of stuff, and I'm not concerned about AI. I'm not an artist, but I'm not concerned about AI art, because, like you said, it doesn't. Anything I've ever seen that a computer's put out doesn't spark that emotion. It has a tendency to be very flat and very kind of,
sure, yeah.
I don't know, B grade and Holiday Inn art, right? That kind of thing.
Easy now.
I don't stay at Holiday Inn, so it's okay.
Hey, I like Holiday Inn
Inn,
Express.
but I don't stay at. I stay at Airbnbs mostly.
To your point, it's I don't want to say generic, but just very clean, or what's the word I'm looking for? Just sterile. Very sterile.
Yes.
Exactly. So I don't know. I think one of the things I want to do with the rest of my career, in addition to, my day job, is look at ways to kind of bring the spark back in. Because, when I was a teenager, and even when I joined the army, Mike, probably the same for you, you couldn't go through an airport without seeing 4, 5, 6, 10 people sitting at every terminal reading a Tom Clancy book or something,
Mhm.
right?
Reading something, yeah.
And I'm not talking about Twitter, right? I'm talking about something.
Yeah.
And the last time I remember that really being the case, where everybody was kind of reading the same book, and I'm not saying everybody should read the same stuff, but was kind of Harry Potter. I think everybody from the age of 10 through like 100 was reading those things everywhere I went. And I read them all. I kind of enjoyed them. They weren't bad. They weren't fantastic. I enjoyed them. I didn't go wait in line for the new one to come out, but by the same token, I did read them all. And I'm not upset that I did. But I don't think there's been anybody. For guys, it's Jack Reacher. Mike, have you read the Reacher stuff?
Yeah, I have. I haven't read them all because God, there's like what 40, 30 of them, 40 of them,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I've read some of them,
Mhm.
but it's one of those that you get to that point where they've got so many,
Mhm.
you can start reading them at your leisure because you're never going to catch up.
Right.
And the Jack Reacher stuff does tend to be kind of formulaic, right? So
It is, yes.
sort of the same every time. Jack Reacher's going to figure out who it is, and then he's going to go punch him in the face, and it's all going to be better. But we like it
And then
because
and then he's going to go walking off to a blues song.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Which is cool to me. So Doug, like with your daughter, one of the things I try to do is like read in front of my kids so that they kind of read along with me, at least something. How do you get her to, I know she takes piano lessons with your wife, obviously, but do you try to encourage some form of fiction, non-school related stuff?
Honestly, I've been really lucky in that I don't have to. We started early on with the Harry Potter stuff, and she clinged onto it. She grabbed onto it. So she's a pretty voracious reader now. And the only thing that I gotta do is pull that darn iPad every after the hour per day, so that she doesn't get stuck on that. But what's the next thing she does without any prompting? She'll grab a book, and we just recently put a swing up in her room that hangs from the ceiling, a little chair swing. That's
Yep.
her spot, man. She sits in that thing with a book, and she's right now reading the Warrior Cat series, which frankly I should know more about, and I don't, but I know I know it's appropriate for her age.
Right.
But I just got to find the right thing that has the right theming for her, and then she'll delve into it. She did the Harry Potter, she did the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, she did this not Dragonlance, but there was another young adult, or not young adult, but young kid dragon series that she read through, and now it's Warrior Cat. So I'm lucky in the fact that she's taken to it. But that's probably because we started her earlier when she was like 5 or 6 and was starting to read. We were like, well, here, and we'd read with her for a while to start and everything. Now
Yeah.
it's just find a theme and let her go. So
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my kids are getting sneaky, right? So they wanted to get Kindles or Kindle books, and they're like, "Oh, we'll get it on Kindle, and I'll read it there." And it's like, but yeah, but now that's your phone or your iPad. I got them all actual Kindles that really only do books. Right?
yeah,
And they were like, "Dad,"
Aw.
can't play Roblox on this.
they're like, "But Dad, there's no internet connection." I'm like, see, but nobody can say, "Oh, I'm going to take your iPad away from you because too much screen time." It's just a book, right? So, um, at least to me, I mean, I know a lot of people don't reprint, and Mike, when what is it, 50 to 1 Kindle versus ebook these days in the market? It's
Oh God.
it's
Well, so talking about the cost ratios, I was actually looking at God, I don't even remember what the title of it was. Um, but it was for the Aliens series. Um, and it was a trade paperback size. And I mean, back in the day for us, I mean, trade paperbacks were, $4 or $5.
Mhm.
And it was like $19. And it was like 8 or 9 on Kindle. And a lot of the Kindle books now you can get for, depending on if you're doing indie authors or mainstream. I mean, you can't get Tom Clancy for probably under 15.
Sure.
But Yeah, the Kindle prices are, or Nook or whatever, they're going to be a lot cheaper.
Yeah, but so like with my kids, one of the things, even with Kindle, there's a connection to your local library that goes through a thing called
Mhm.
Libby that'll actually work on your Kindle. So you
Yep.
can borrow a Kindle book, even the Tom Clancy stuff that's more expensive, from your local library, and they'll send it right to your Kindle. You get it for 3 weeks and it just disappears.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's not like those devices. I think those devices could really be sort of the future of actually getting people to read, because nobody wants to carry this kind of crap around. I mean, that's just too heavy.
My daughter was for a while until she got into high school and they stopped using lockers due to COVID. And she has to carry all of her damn books and folders and notebooks. And I mean, it it looks like she's wearing a rucksack now. Going back to our days, I mean, it looks like she's got a freaking rucksack on with all her crap in it. And
My
she has no room for those size books anymore because it's just
my middle schoolers have the same problem. You got to have your Chromebook, you got to have all kinds of other crap the school makes you carry, and by the end of it, it's like, do you need some aspirin for your knees? Because this shit's gonna hurt after a while.
it needs nothing. I'm worried about her back.
Yeah, because your daughter's not a huge kid, right? She's pretty.
No, she's yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
but yeah, I mean, as a parent, I mean, I got my kids these things, and like they'll carry them around, and the batteries last forever, and I don't care if they're reading on this. And hey, if you are a parent and you get your kids one of these, you actually get reading reports, so it'll actually email you how much they've actually read, if you configure it right. So when your son said, especially my teenager, when he's like, "Oh no, I read a book for like 4 hours last night," I'm like, "Really? Let me look." He's like, "I mean, I'm gonna read a book."
for I'm gonna read a book for 4 minutes.
Right.
Like,
Crap.
so
Busted.
anyway, so I think the point here is, I think one of the things that separates at least creative people from non-creative people is the fact that they do this kind of stuff. And if you look at AI and machine learning over the next 5, 10 years, by any stretch of the imagination, it's going to decimate certain job spaces. And people who I think are going to be kept around are people who don't have to be told what to go do, who can figure it out for themselves and are the creative types. And I think reading is a great way to do that. And I think publishers and indie authors and everybody needs to start thinking about, hey, let's not worry about volumes of content. Let's worry about content that's actually worth turning past page 12.
Quality of the content.
Yeah.
Because I've read a number of books. I'm like, and I rarely will stop before the end of chapter 3, but I've gotten I've looked at some books that are like 800 Amazon reviews, 5 stars, and I get to like chapter 3, and I'm like, I can't do it. I just like
I've done a
if
couple of those.
if I could tell you what's going to happen and I'm right, for the last 50 pages, I really don't care anymore, right? So I try to make at least our stories a little more interesting and kind of well thought out, and I think we do okay with that.
Yeah.
Uh, and our reviews are pretty good. So we'll keep plugging at it. But I think the world is missing like the next generation's Tom Clancy, and I'm not saying Mike and I are it, but maybe we are. Um,
Someday.
one serial killer priest at a time. Uh,
Maybe. Maybe.
my absolute favorite review about that one, by the way, was the guy who wrote me an email and said, "I'm not going to finish this book because I just realized what you're doing, and no priest would ever do that." And I was like, "Really?" So I sent him a clip from an article that showed that it was a research article in a peer-reviewed academic journal that showed that Hitler refused to get his picture taken with Pope Pius XII because of the church's history on human rights violations, especially involving kids. Adolf Hitler thought the Pope was bad for his image. Tell me
Damn.
again.
Yeah, damn is right. Really?
Damn.
Tell me again how priests.
When one of the worst homicidal maniac genocidal sons of bitches thinks the Pope is bad press.
Hitler
Fuck.
told Pope Pius XII a public meeting was out of the question because of the church's record with little boys. It was known in the 40s that was going on, and it's still shit we're hearing about.
Sweet Jesus, what the fuck?
So tell me again how the church wouldn't cover up shenanigans.
I mean, Okay, now, I'm Catholic. I'm a bad Catholic, but I'm a Catholic. But I'm not foolish enough to deny that we've done some bad shit in our time. I mean, the Inquisition, the Crusades, we were kind of ruthless in that shit. But yeah, really,
Hitler.
Hitler?
He was all about
Next thing he's going to say is, Mussolini needs to be, the leader of the church. Come on, Jesus Christ. Holy Jeebus.
You got to give him credit for style points. All right. Thanks everybody. Click like and subscribe, follow on. We'll have other guest stars on. Doug, thanks for coming in, and Mike, thanks as always.
Yeah, not a problem.